Well, throughout all this, they all kept saying, oh, we're following the science and we've got scientific advice. Well, they didn't take Jay Bhattacharya's advice in the Great Barrington Declaration to stop locking people down and simply protect the vulnerable, did they?
Well, that's right. So that was tabled in October 2020. I think we've all had some sympathy, Fred, for the decisions that governments made, in the immediate weeks and months, maybe the first month of the so-called pandemic that was taking place. But certainly by October of 2020, by Christmas of that year, all of those justifications had fallen away. But they kept making the same choice. They were locked into it and they didn't want to have to admit that they were wrong.
Well, and they kept doubling down, as it says in your other report, which is titled The Crime of Criminalising Everyday Life. It sounds frightening, really. It's Kafkaesque, really. This report says the number of new laws created at the whim of Victoria's Chief Health Officer during the pandemic and the speed with which they were implemented were unprecedented. That's the word that's used in the report. Those laws extinguished fundamental freedoms of expression and movement. Did you find any basis in hindsight, with the benefit of hindsight, did you find any basis for these laws to be enacted?
No, we didn't, Fred. It was written by a professor of law, Mirko Bagaric, and his point was, quite rightly, that the criminal law is meant to be reserved for the most heinous of offences. We use the criminal law for murders, for rapes, for robberies, for burglaries. But in this case, it was applied to the realm of public health where traditionally public health practitioners and governments work with the population. They educate the population, they lead them. And in Australia, we actually had a public that was very interested, perhaps too interested in all the things that could go wrong with the virus that was sweeping the world. And so the scope for a public education campaign was very large. Instead, what we had in Victoria was the full force of criminal law on things like, walking in groups of more than two, being out after 8 p.m. Children were being fined more than $1,000 for playing tennis and actually subject to criminal sanction. So there was never any basis for using the criminal law in that way.
So, but just to be clear, with the benefit of hindsight, there was no basis. Was there any basis for them at the time?
Well, like I say, there was the basis for public health orders to be made. That's a standard provision, and some sort of public health orders might have been mentioned, but they should not have been criminalised. Ordinary Victorians should not have been criminalising for things that really were just, ordinances and guidance to be issued by public health officers.
So the alternative, you're saying, should have been a public education campaign, not criminalising everyday behaviour, just educate the public and let them make their own decisions, for their own benefit or for their own health.
Exactly. Trust in the people of Australia. Trust in the people of Victoria would have been a much better approach, and we would have seen then we wouldn't have seen this loss of trust in the institutions in Victoria that we've subsequently seen. It's a reciprocal process, the relationship between governments and the public at large, and that relationship was really broken at that moment.